I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati. Our esteemed guest today is Tyler Cobble. You know, real estate is a referral business. It's a relationship business. And I was referred to Tyler by Evan Holiday. Evan's the podcast host of Monumental. Tyler, we're going to have a discussion today about commercial real estate. He is the founding principal and president of a boutique commercial real estate brokerage firm called the Cobble Group in Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome to our show, Tyler.
Yeah, Kyle, excited to be here, man. Thanks for having me. I'm really glad that Evan got us connected.
I love it. And I'm so excited. I love Nashville, by the way. And we were chatting about this as we were prepping. What an awesome city, so much growth. What a really cool conversation for us to have today about economics, because commercial real estate is all about job growth. It's all about people moving into space, buying buildings, renovating, value add stuff. So we're going to have a really cool conversation just about all things commercial real estate today.
Yeah, I'm excited to do it. Nashville is it's a very interesting market. You know, I'm one of the few natives that is actually still in Nashville now, or so it seems. And it's kind of wild to see how much it's grown. I mean, literally when I was growing up, the town shut down at 10 o'clock at night. There was nothing to do here. And now it's one of the 18-hour cities. There's always something going on. It's really, really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I don't know about as much about Nashville as someone that's born and raised there, but I will say that I have been going to Nashville consistently every fall since 2012, and I have seen the growth. I've heard people call it Nash Vegas, and it's the bachelorette, capital of the U.S. or whatever, and all these different things. It's just such a cool city, and at the same time, there are some fundamental things that probably never change or are harder to change. And so let's talk about maybe what a lot of people want to address in commercial real estate, which is either the good old boys network or the fraternity or the whatever. There is a lot of commercial real estate kind of truisms that are hard and fast that take a long time to debunk. And I know that for maybe some younger guys, some more youthful guys that are in commercial real estate like you and myself, we've probably dealt with some of those things. And so what are some of the things that you've observed about maybe the old crackly way of doing brokerage in an established town like Nashville, as I have in Denver, that you really feel like are myths or things that we need to debunk about the commercial real estate industry?
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's really true though, right? Like, the fraternity aspect of it, or the good old boys club, it's certainly true in Nashville. I mean, Nashville, even though we've been growing at this, incredible rate, it is still a very small town. And, Nashville has well over 12,000 residential agents, but I would say you've got probably fewer than 400 commercial brokers. And out of that, it's probably fewer than 100 that are really doing everything, right? The 80-20 rule. And so you think about the competition, you just don't need a whole lot of people working in the industry. So it's really tough to break into. You got to really know somebody. But I took the opposite path. I've never been part of that crowd. I didn't want to be a part of that crowd. I mean, you look at your typical commercial real estate broker, they're like a 60-year-old white man, clean shaven, does everything by Padfolio and types in all caps in his email. I mean, it's like the stereotype rings true. I got my commercial broker's license when I was 21. I'm covered in tattoos. I have a beard. I do things a little bit differently, and I've always wanted to. And honestly, I think that was the best way I could have ever started off my career. I didn't try to fit into something that I wasn't. I just always stayed true to myself. So that's probably one piece of advice I would give to people. If you can't break into the good old boys club, don't worry about it. Go start your own.
It's sage advice, and I totally agree. One of my favorite clients, one of the people that I've succeeded a lot with in the commercial real estate industry, looks and acts a lot like you, Tyler, and everybody's a little different, but he's got a big old beard. He'll wear cutoff shorts. He's got tattoos all over. He's one of the wealthiest guys that I know under the age of 50. It's amazing. It just goes to show you that you certainly can't judge a book by its cover. Now, speaking about books, one of the things I'm excited to share with our Calibrate Real Estate audience is your book, Open for Business. I know as we were chatting and just kind of learning about each other, that you wrote that book because as a commercial realtor, as a commercial real estate broker, you work with a lot of startup businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs. You help people find space, whether it's office, industrial, or retail. And I imagine that through the process of working with business owners like myself, that you learn so much about their entrepreneurial journey. You've learned the pitfalls, you share the highs and the lows with them. You help people open their offices and unfortunately probably close their offices. So what was that journey like becoming an author? Congrats, by the way. And then also, what's the book about if our podcast audience wants to go get it out on Amazon?
Yeah, thank you so much. So you can get it on Amazon. It's just Open for Business, The Insider's Guide to Leasing Commercial Real Estate. It's a white book with red text. When I first got started, again, being, a 21-year-old, you're not really going to be able to just go call Target and start working with them, right? So I started off working with, smaller local businesses. And that's where I found my love for entrepreneurship. I loved the startup mentality and the grit and the grind that came from that side of things. And so I decided to focus on that. So I never even tried to go the corporate route. Clearly, I'm the opposite of corporate. So, I was working with this. One, just a ton of small business owners, but one in particular that I kept in mind when I was writing the book was a doctor that I knew, and she decided to. She always wanted to open up a medical spa, and so she had her dental practice, and then she wanted to open up a medical spa immediately next door to it because she could walk there, do all the Botox and whatever, and then go back to her dental work. And so it made all the sense in the world, right? Super efficient. Well, she was actually located in a blue collar area. So for her dental practice, it made all the sense in the world. But for a medical spa, that's a terrible location. She ended up spending six figures on the build out, got really ripped off by her contractor, to the point where like there weren't even can lights in the ceilings. She just got taken advantage of. And so I got called, started looking at all this, and there was just nothing we could do. It was too late. So she ended up having to close the business down. We relocated the medical spa. She had to spend another $50,000 or $100,000 to build up the next space. And so you think about how long that would take her to recoup for a small business. I just started thinking, man, if only she knew the right way to go about this, who should be on her team, how she should go about the whole process, it would have saved her hundreds of thousands of dollars and all of this headache. So that's why we decided to write the book. It was a very interesting process. I mean, it took me a little over a year to write. I've got a publisher out of Austin, Texas, and it became an Amazon bestseller within about 48 hours. So it was it was a fun experience. I enjoyed it.
By chance, is that publisher Greenleaf?
It is not as Lion
Okay.
Crest.
Oh, nice. Great. I've got to check them out as well. There's a lot of great publishers in Austin, and Greenleaf is one that I've talked to. So I'll definitely check the other group out. Something that I have noticed just about your Instagram, and just as a podcast host, I like to try to do some research. I feel like the best episodes are ones that are well researched, and you end up picking up a couple of podcast interviews with a guest, and then you also check them out on Instagram, check them out on LinkedIn. And I've just noticed that the style of your Instagram is really polished and it's very professional, but it also has that grit and that tenacity that embodies the entrepreneurial journey. And so is that intentional, Tyler? What did you learn? Did you learn from someone? Do you have someone monitor or actually admin your Instagram? Are you doing all that on your own?
Yeah, I actually do it all on my own. 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, when I first started it, maybe it was 3 or 4. Yeah, I'd never had Instagram before. I wasn't comfortable sharing pictures of myself. I feel like that's pretty relatable to a lot of people. And I say that now because I've got nearly 13,000 followers. And it's basically all from just sharing pictures of myself, and the projects that we're working on, and talking about the journey. One thing that I really was intentional about taking differently was my approach. I'm going to tell the behind the scenes story, the story that everybody's interested in, that they would love to hear, but they never get to, about, what's happening with that project down the street, or, who's this tenant that's coming into this space, instead of peppering their feeds with, hey, lease this space for me. Hey, I come buy a building with me. Hey, come sell this building. All that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to follow you on Instagram just to be advertised to, right? They want to hear the story. They want to see a journey. And so I was very intentional about taking people on that journey. Instagram is one of those, it's a social media phenomenon where you've got to share a phenomenal photo, right? It's all about the photo. The caption is next. If you don't have a good photo, people probably aren't going to read the caption. And so I learned that very early on, like, okay, we've got to take, the highest quality photos possible, grab somebody's attention, and then tell a compelling story. So, one that we did this week was me standing in front of a car wash that I just bought. We just announced that we're converting the car wash into micro restaurant units, basically a retail facing ghost kitchen. So it ended up going viral, but I caught people's attention with the photo, and then I had a full explanation of what the project was, why we decided to do it, what it means for, restaurant startups and chefs. And, it ended up getting like 200 comments. I mean, it resonated with a lot of people. And so, Instagram has brought us a ton of business. I think the largest listing we've ever gotten out of it was $6.5 million, which is pretty crazy for just Instagram. And then we get investors through it all the time. I mean, I bring investors into all of my deals. And the great thing about Instagram is that it allows me to share the behind the scenes of, how we go through the whole process. And so investors actually get comfortable with who I am, the process, and they'll reach out and ask to join in on some of our projects. So it's really interesting how dynamic that form of media can be.
I love Instagram and I'm newer to it and I'm working through some different things, but I will share that we've got some folks on staff here at Calibrate that are far better at Instagram than I am. And so kudos to you for adminning and running it and having that really be your authentic self, which I think is important. The
Thank
other
you.
part of it too is I think something that is really lacking in commercial real estate, and we touched on it earlier in the interview, is just this. We've got this maybe good old boys or good old girls network that is kind of tight-lipped and does a lot of deals, maybe off market. I don't want to say under the table because that sounds maybe more negative than it needs to be, but certainly off market, not transparent, not wide open. And when you're sharing those stories, the behind the scenes, that really is a story that resonates in commercial real estate because so often people aren't sharing it. And you're right. I can think of several of my rivals in the industry, and I've learned to stop calling my other people that I maybe compete with competitors, their rivals. I learned that from Simon Sinek. And one of the things I've learned is that most people just kind of put like, here's a building, here's what we sold, here's what we've listed. And it's like, that's really boring. I can find that out on any website, CoStar, LoopNet,
That's
et
right.
cetera. So that's not exciting. But I think that you've touched on something that really taking away that tight-lipped nature of commercial real estate. And so have you learned that other people are interested in that they're interested in the behind the scenes? And obviously it provides you a vehicle, a conduit to getting investors. But what are some of the, maybe the connections that you've gotten through Instagram or just through your openness that a lot of other commercial realtors need to hear nationwide?
Yeah, I mean, it's had a massive impact on our business. 2 years ago, it was 20% of our revenue was through Instagram, which is remarkable to think about. I guess I kind of have a unique perspective, right? Because I'm a native. I grew up in Nashville. I'm in East Nashville, which has all the cool food and beverage concepts. I get to go to these sneak peeks of these restaurants and bars when they open, and so I'm always sharing stories about all these cool new restaurants and things that are coming to town. And so, I have a pretty large audience that follows me just because of that. They just want to see, what new food and restaurant and beverage concepts are coming to the neighborhood or where they should go do dinner next. I have some that just want to follow what's going on in Nashville, and then I've got the investors. I've got the investors and other brokers and people who are interested in learning more about commercial real estate because I really do kind of pull back the curtains, so to say, that here's how I do all of this. You're welcome to go do it. Here's how I do it. And so that creates multiple audiences that I can kind of satisfy with all the same content, right? And so whenever people see that you're a broker, like let's say the investor, for example, is following you and they see that you're active in the market, you're going to all these different places, and then they've got a building that they need leased and they're not watching anybody else be active in the market like that. Well, I'm going to be top of mind, not my competitors, or as I like to call them, my co-opetition, because we're cooperating, but we're also competition for each other, right? Because like at the end of the day, we all want the same outcome for the neighborhoods, but we're still competition. So I like how you call them rivals. That's great.
Yeah, I learned that book. Simon Sinek. Everybody knows Start with Why. That was a wild success. One of his newer books talks about this whole concept of really having a worthy rival, and understanding that your rival is going to oust you at times, but also that they push you to be better. And one of the things that you hate about your rival is that a lot of times they end up having mirroring traits that are maybe things that you don't have, and you see some of your own inadequacies and you feel a little insecure around your rival. But the reality is they've got a different approach to doing business, and there's space for both of you. So
Right.
it's called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. It's a great read, and very actually looks very similar, white and red colors to your book too, Tyler. So definitely recommended read for our audience. All right, so on Instagram, let's get really tactical about,
Cool.
now you shared some of the things behind the scenes, but for those that are really trying to grow their Instagram audience, regardless of what market you're in, I've got a couple of suggestions, and I know Tyler does too. Tyler, let's go through really how you approach making a post. And I would say, how do you do that so that it doesn't take up all of your time? Because it can be all encompassing. And so what are some of the step-by-step approaches of frequency of posting, how long it takes you to make a great post? Do you hire professional photographers? Let's just kind of go through all the different things that you do to make a great Instagram post.
Definitely. So, when I first got started, I was posting once a day during the business week, right? Because my audience is going to be active during business hours. We're talking to investors, we're talking to business owners. That's really when they're going to be active. So I was posting every day during the week, and that was great starting out. It gets your content in front of people more. But at some point, if you're going to be posting every day and you're a business owner and you're not a fashion model or a restaurant or something like that, you kind of run out of ideas, right? Like there's just not a whole lot of really unique content that you can continue to share. So now I post once every 2 to 4 weeks, honestly, on my grid. Because when I post something on my grid, I want it to be unique and compelling. When somebody goes to visit your profile, the first 6 photos are, what they're going to judge you by. And so I don't ever want there to be a photo in that first 6 photos that would potentially compromise their following me. So, I work to keep that as high quality as possible. Now, on the stories, I do stories every day, and I do everything that I can to include my audience in what we're doing. So we'll have Q&As, and I'll do polls, and I'll do questions. The whole like yes or no kind of things. That gets people interacting, which Instagram sees. Oh, hey, people are actually interacting with what this guy's doing, which means that they'll start putting it in front of more people. And so, that really helps. Like after that car wash announcement, I went on, and right now we're doing a little Q&A about the project. And so I'm sharing all of these questions and typing in the answers. And so, that's getting hundreds and hundreds of views, which just keeps me top of mind for all these people. So, and stories go away, but you can also save them to your highlights. So on my highlights, I have them broken out by project. So, I've got 4 or 5 projects on there. You can go back and actually watch one of my first value add projects ever from literally, it's over a year of content. And I have people do that all the time. They'll reach out and be like, wow, it's so cool to watch you go through that whole journey from, the day that you closed on it and, to when you started on renovations, to when you started leasing it up to tenants, to the day that you sold it. So I keep that in my highlights just for that reason. So, as far as professional photographers go, yes, we will use professional photographers. I also will use my iPhone. I also have my own camera, so I'm not, ashamed to admit that I will set it up on a timer on a tripod and take photos of myself. It just depends on what I need to get. And I've also got a drone, so that helps get some super cool photos that most people otherwise can't get. So, we kind of take a multi approach. I don't do any videos on my grid. The quality of videos on Instagram gets compressed quite a bit. Whenever you upload to your grid, I'll use IGTV every now and then, but no videos on the grid. And I also don't do any graphics in my grid. I think that for some accounts that makes a lot of sense. For the majority, it probably does not. you know, I mean, if you go look at my account, it's commercial in Nashville with underscores in between the words. I kind of took this almost influencer approach, but I'm not really trying to influence you in any way, if that makes any sense. Like I just want to tell you a cool story.
All of that advice is really incredible. And I've been writing notes, and I'm sure that if someone's out there driving around, obviously don't be taking notes while you're driving, but some of the things that my takeaways is, as someone might rewind those last 2 minutes, some of my takeaways are that I need to constantly be talking to our staff about is that your first 6 photos, absolutely. That's what they're going to be looking for on your feed when they're looking at following someone. Okay, those 6 photos, how does that look in the current format of Instagram on the feed or on the grid? In the story, I love this, and it makes sense to me, but I think I need to recommunicate it because I didn't really think this way, that the way that you approach your feed and your story should be very different. And what you're doing on either should really have its own brand within the same application. So really kind of bifurcating or splitting the way that you approach Instagram. Is this going to go on the story or on the feed? And how often you post to your feed versus how often you post to your story. Your story is kind of like an everyday type of thing. And you sort of dump it if it wasn't really that good because it disappears. But if it was worthwhile, you can keep it. I love the polls, the Q&A, the interactions, professional photos. I mean, a lot of commercial real estate agents are spending money on professional photos anyways. A lot of us get drone photos because it's almost impossible to capture an office park or a big multifamily project or industrial. Oh my gosh, like industrial, just the
Oh yeah.
vast expanse of it. So you're already spending all that money on your drone photos. Put them out to your Instagram and put a cool caption with it. And then the thing that I think is so interesting, and I completely agree with you, is not only what you do, but what you don't do. You don't do video and you don't do graphics. And that's okay. You've drawn a line in the sand and said, I'm just not going to do that on my Instagram. It might work for others, but it's not going to be something that I focus a lot of time on. So I really appreciate all those takeaways. I actually did an episode, Tyler, with another Instagram realtor that's on the residential side, and her name's Rebecca Donatelli. I did an interview with her this year as she launched her new book, but also on episode 80, which had all these Instagram strategies. And we came up with this acronym that I want to share with you, and it probably will resonate. The acronym is CARE, C-A-R-E. Is you need to care for your audience. And the C stands for consistent. The A is authentic. The R is reach. And the E is engage. So consistent, authentic, reach, engage. And what we were thinking about, and it came out, it was one of those beautiful podcasts, like, you deliver this to the world. I didn't realize it as we were coming through, but I'm writing notes down. I'm like, care. Yeah, absolutely. And so you've got to be consistent with how you post. Obviously, you've got to be authentic. Tyler can't try to be Kyle. Kyle can't try to be Tyler. Reach is important. I mean, if you're not growing your audience at some point, you're putting a lot of information out there and it's not resonating. And then engagement, making sure that you engage with your audience. Does that all feel like that lands for you?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, one thing that I was intentional about in that post where I announced the car wash was, tag your favorite restaurant startup. And that's why we ended up getting close to 200 comments, because I mean, you go through that feed and people are tagging 1, 2, 3 restaurants. And now my listing gets exposed to all of them. And one thing that I'm also pretty intentional about too, because you were talking about, share your industrial park. And I think that's a great idea. I never, on mine at least, I never post photos of just buildings, because most people, 99.9% of people, do not care at all. They just won't care. But the 1% that does, you want to make sure they see it. And if a lot of people are not liking that photo, they won't see it because Instagram will stop showing it to people because of their algorithms. So what I'll do is I'll have a photographer come with me on site and get some photos of me walking around. And then that's the main photo. And you can do a little multi-photo. So you can actually swipe through to take a look at the whole park. That way, my grid stays the exact same. It's all pictures of me on site or something like that. And then if you want to go swipe through and look at the property, you can. And the consistency also has to do with timing, but also with the type of posts, right? If you're doing, almost all photos of yourself, and then all of a sudden you start posting pictures of, plated food, and then pictures of buildings, and then you go back to yourself and then buildings and then plated food. It's like, what are we following you here for? I was here to follow you in your journey, but now you're showing me, I don't know, the latest steak restaurant, right? And that's cool, but people kind of want to see you, or if I guess it depends on how you set up your Instagram account, but that's how it was for us.
Yeah, another author in Nashville that I'm sure you've heard of is Donald
Yep.
Miller. And Donald Miller constantly says to his story brand audience that if you confuse, you'll lose. And it's completely accurate. And I'm guilty of it. I'm thinking, I'm like cringing. I'm like, oh man, I just did that. So I think it's great for those that are out on Instagram. There are ways that you can build an amazing audience, and it actually generates revenue. It generates deals for the commercial real estate agent out there that's skeptical of like, oh, Instagram is all fantasy land and it's only for resi agents. I think Tyler's proof in the pudding that absolutely not the case. Now, something else I've picked up just along the way of kind of learning about you and studying for our interview, Tyler, is that I heard you say at one point that it has been years since you've made a cold call as a commercial realtor. And
Yeah.
now that is something, if you're a residential agent, which we have a big audience here with Calibrate Real Estate that are residential, cold calls sound like torture to a residential agent because they're working sphere of influence. But if you're working with business owners, you're going to make some cold calls. You're going to introduce yourself to people you've never met before. And it's scary and also thrilling all at the same time. And there's some cold call junkies that'll listen and be like, oh, I just love to make cold calls. But I
Oh yeah.
agree with you that because of the growth of my email database, and that's something I've focused on a lot over the past 4 years of being a commercial brokerage owner, going from a team leader to now a brokerage owner, the email database has been huge for us. But then also social media helps you not make cold calls. Let's talk about that a little bit and how you can really remove yourself from making cold calls.
Absolutely. So, cold calling works. First off, whenever people say, "Oh, cold calling's dead," no, they don't know what they're talking about. It does work. The problem with cold calling is that it is a lot of work, and you actually have to be really good at it. Because think about it, it's a cold call. You're calling somebody that does not know who you are, and in 15 seconds, you've got to convince them why they should stay on the phone with you. And so, I used to make 100 to 150 cold calls a day. I mean, I was really good at it. And I would sometimes set up 8 to 12 meetings, and, it really worked. But I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to have to go out and hunt all the time. So if I'm not going to hunt, I've got to fish. And I've got to set out so many fishing lines that I'm constantly reeling in fish without having to actively go out and find them. So that was one of the reasons I wrote the book. That was one of the reasons I started the Instagram account. One of the reasons we started the blog. I mean, our blog gets over 20,000 organic visits a month now. One of the reasons I started the YouTube channel. One of the reasons I try to be active and get on podcasts. We just started our own podcast. So the more I joined all these networking groups. I joined the Chamber. I joined BNI. I joined the Entrepreneur Center. So all of those factors contributed to my not having to make a cold call ever again. I got out and met people, and because of my brand and I'm a bigger dude with a beard, like people kind of just remember that. That's where it started really working for me. I was like, oh cool, maybe I should keep the beard. It's working. And then it snowballed from there, and I got really good at the marketing piece. And so I do all of my own PR and my own marketing. And so because of that, I mean, people are seeing my name all the time. And so it just constantly reiterates, the brand recognition. This guy's out there doing stuff. So, if you go onto LinkedIn and you see me writing about something, and then you go on Instagram and you scroll past one of my pictures, and then you open up the Nashville Post and you see an article about a project I'm doing, you're going to go, wow, this guy's doing a lot. He's everywhere. That's the guy I'm going to call.
It's great advice, and I'm glad that you shared that because I often have felt the same way, that I'm going to be my own PR vehicle. I've used a couple of good PR people, but generally the best PR is the stuff that you share. And as a commercial real estate agent, we're in the business of sharing things anyways. You're constantly doing that for your own clientele. or if you're raising capital, you're trying to find a way to get investors interested. We are good at sales. If you last in this industry, you're good at sales. And so you've got to think of yourself as one of your most important clients as well. I think that's one of the things that a lot of commercial real estate agents get totally wrong. They go to the ends of the earth, and regardless of what section of commercial real estate you're in, there's a lot of really good professional people in our industry, and they'll go to the ends of the earth for their clients, but they don't do it for themselves. And I think it's a huge mistake.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't ever want to have to call somebody and convince them why they should work with me. That was the most frustrating part about cold calling for me, is that like, you're basically starting over with every single call as to why you should convince this person to work with you. So, if by building my own brand, I don't have to sell anybody on anything. They call me and they're already ready to go to work with me.
Yeah. And that, what ends up happening is this podcast is absolutely recruited brokers here to our own company. I mean, that's real life stuff. It is absolutely recruited different clients. So you basically start not at square one or at the basement level of a conversation. You're starting 2 or 3 steps ahead in the journey, and it's just that much more efficient. So at a minimum, just think of it, for those that are more pragmatic, that are more logical thinkers, it's just a more efficient way of doing business.
That's right. And
All
scalable.
right. Yes, it is scalable. And we, at the end of every interview, Tyler, we go through a couple of questions that we prepare our guests for, and I'm excited to hear your answers. You ready? A little bit of rapid fire here, but these are some deep questions.
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So the first is, it comes from a song that I really enjoy, and I've asked every guest on this podcast this idea of Dear Younger Me. So what I want you to kind of think about here, Tyler, is that if you're writing advice to yourself, now that you've lived some life, you've built a brand, and you're maybe in your early 20s, I've dubbed this the advice you wish you knew you were when you were 22. What's that Dear Younger Me advice that you would write in a letter to yourself?
I'd say buy that first building faster. I actually ended up developing 42 townhomes before I bought my first office investment. And I was always just scared of it for whatever reason. And well, I mean, not for whatever reason, like it is a big step, right? I mean, you're bringing on investor capital. You're responsible for somebody else's money at that point. And it's a big deal. I mean, there's a lot that could go wrong. But what I realized after getting that first one closed was it was so much easier than I had ever thought it was. I bought 3 more buildings that year. So if only I had gotten started earlier, who knows how many buildings I would have now. So go out and buy that first one.
All right. Now, I don't normally do this, but just a little follow-up question. When you're doing Dear Younger Me for someone that's got open for business in their hands, and they're a young entrepreneur that may not be buying a building, and I know that might be part of the advice as well, but if someone's opening a restaurant, or they're a plumber that's going to lease some space in one of your industrial parks, what's the advice that you would give for an aspiring entrepreneur in their early 20s?
That's a great question. The first thing I would say is find a solid tenant representation broker that knows your industry incredibly well. I would look for somebody that has at least 3 to 5 years of experience. Sorry to all the new brokers out there that are hearing that. But find somebody with 3 to 5 years of experience that can help show you the ropes, right? Because what you cannot afford to do is mess up on your first location, because that will set you so far back. You may never recover. So that's step number 1. Go out and interview at least 3 brokers. Figure out who's going to be the best fit for you. And then second step is go find a real estate attorney, because you need to have representatives on your side. The great thing about a tenant rep broker is that you as the business owner do not pay for their representation. It's just like buying a house. The seller pays their commission, or the landlord pays their commission. So it doesn't make sense for you to not have representation, to have a professional that knows exactly what they're doing.
Now you apologized, and I appreciate that for the younger brokers that are listening out there, but there were cues in your answer that I want to park on for just a second before I ask my next question.
Sure.
So for the younger brokers, yeah, you may not have 3 to 5 years of experience, but you can work with someone that does. Someone like yourself, Tyler, someone like myself, that frankly, we have more leads than we know what to do with at times. We're pulling our hair out because we have more people that need our help and our advice, and we need some boots on the ground, some people to do the legwork. So as a young broker, go find a mentor, go find someone that can help you understand the craft of our business in commercial real estate. So the second thing here, as a follow up to that question, the location part of things should be obvious. Everybody knows real estate's location, location, location. But when you shared about having a tenant rep broker really get you in the right location, let's think about retail, because I love your car wash concept into the, the startup retail and restaurant. I think all of us at the end of 2020 here, and I try not to date our interviews, but we're in this tail end of the pandemic, hopefully, and everybody's looking to a brighter 2021. If you're out there and you want to start a restaurant, I think Tyler's probably got some great advice for you. So what are some of the things that restaurateurs that are entrepreneurs really need to think about when it comes to their location?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Real quick before I dive into that, I do want to touch on the newer, younger brokers point first. One thing that I always said, and it works, it probably works over 50% of the time when you're dealing with smaller businesses, is, hey, look, yeah, maybe I don't have 3 to 5 years of experience, but I also have all of the time this week to dedicate to you because you're one of only a handful of clients that I've got, which means that you are getting so much of my attention and so much of my dedication, and I have to make this work. Now don't come off as desperate, but the right business owners will see that as, well, I'm going to get more attention and I deserve more attention. And you can kind of frame it almost as a disadvantage to be an older broker because they've got bigger deals that they're working on that they're going to be focused on. So you can actually turn that to your advantage. But as far as finding the right location goes for retail or restaurants post COVID, one thing that we're focusing on is micro units. And I know that that's huge in multifamily, but micro units that will be a massive trend over the next few years. So the great thing about like that concept, the retail facing ghost kitchen, is that if public dining gets shut down, all of the dining room for that project is outside. So you can still go up, get food to go, and sit outside at a picnic table if you want. They can't stop you from doing that. All of the parking spaces are also optimized for to go and delivery. So they're 10 minutes max. So they can continue to serve without having to pay for a dead dining room, essentially, right? Do you think about how much dead space? I think a lot of restaurants got way too big and they've realized that. And I think we'll see some efficiency come towards that. I think that big box retail centers are going to continue to struggle. I mean, there's no surprise there. But if you are a creative investor, there are plenty of adaptive reuses for those types of product. I mean, think about what would fit well in a 10,000 square foot big box retail center in the middle of a neighborhood that has super tall ceilings, a distribution facility. Go find Amazon or go find, some sort of like last mile delivery component because you're already in a great neighborhood. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about those retail power centers. The other thing too is neighborhood retail. Neighborhood retail is still crushing it in certain parts of the country, in Nashville especially, because people are staying at home, but they don't want to cook every meal every day. So they're either walking to their favorite restaurants or they're running down the street to pick up from their favorite restaurants. And those, I mean, we've had some restaurant clients open up in the middle of this pandemic and exceed their pre-COVID expectations. So it just completely depends on where you're located, but I would go for neighborhood.
I love all that advice. Okay, the last question we ask all of our guests is a newer question. It only developed within the past year. And unfortunately, it comes with a little bit of sadness. A fellow Nashvilleian, a guy named Chris Oakley, who passed away last year, was my career coach. And he passed away in a tragic hunting accident. And this is a tribute to Chris. His answer to the Dear Younger Me question was that he was in a mentoring group in Nashville in his 20s. And one of the leaders of this mentoring group had all the young 20 somethings read a book called The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. And in that book, Andy Stanley encourages his reader to write their own obituary. I think of Stephen Covey's, start with the end in mind type of concept. And Tyler, if you had a loved one deliver your eulogy, or if you had someone at the Nashville Post writing your obituary, hopefully it's decades from now, what would you want to be remembered for? This is a question of legacy.
I would say it'd probably be a pretty short sentence, but he gave his all for Nashville. I love my city. I love everything that it's given me. And so being a broker, an investor, and a developer in my city, it's I don't know, truly magical, honestly, that I get to be a part of creating these hubs. and creating spots where, small business owners will thrive, and the opportunity that that creates, the restaurants where, the neighborhood, the family down the street can, bring their kid in a wagon to go have lunch on a Saturday. That stuff is really cool to me that we get to actually do that, and make money doing it too. But my lifelong dream is to have the most architecturally significant tower on the Nashville skyline. And so I think that that one sentence would pretty much sum it up. He gave his all for Nashville.
I love that you shared that your goal is to have the most architecturally significant building on the Nashville skyline, because I've heard you say, and obviously you see this if you know anything about Nashville, that AT&T building that looks like Batman is,
Oh
is
yeah.
the one that's in all the skyline, right? So to have that be a goal, what a big, hairy, audacious goal, like Jim Collins would say, and what a cool thing. And I appreciate your answer. It's actually the first time we've had that particular answer about loving your city from a commercial real estate practitioner, because I believe that there's a lot of people that inappropriately think of commercial real estate as stuffy, as stodgy, as an old business, as whatever, not fun. And if you think about the end user, the person who goes to a restaurant, the person who opens their first business and it's in an office building, the plumber, the HVAC contractor that helps you when your furnace shuts down, they're all occupying commercial real estate. And each one of those people helps us in our everyday lives. And you just don't think about it that way. So I appreciate that as a commercial developer, broker, et cetera, that Tyler, you're focused in on that part of it, because I think that that gets lost on a lot of commercial real estate practitioners.
I completely agree. I mean, yeah, of course you need to look at the bottom line, and projects need to make sense. But, adding the walkability factor or the green factor, these other intangible, or what some would say are intangible ways of spending money but not necessarily making money on a project, it changes your frame of mind on those things. I mean, walkability, of course, is going to impact your bottom line. Maybe you can't quantify it, but it's worth it, and it makes the whole neighborhood better. It makes the city better. So little things like that. But yeah, I love that stuff, man.
Tyler, as we close out our show, I want to make sure people get the book on Amazon, Open for Business by Tyler Cobble. And if they want to check out your Instagram, how do they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's at commercial in Nashville with underscores in between the words as spaces. You could probably also just type in Tyler Cobble, CAUB as in boy, LE, and that will pop up at commercial in Nashville. And then I also have a YouTube channel where, we talked about how earlier, how, there's not a whole lot shared about the behind the scenes of commercial real estate. So on the YouTube channel, I'm sharing videos on investing strategies, leasing and management tips, market updates, and so much more. So be sure to check that out. It's just under my name, Tyler Cobble.
Tyler, thank you so much for being a guest on our show. And as a helpful thing for your book, I will give away 5 copies of Open for Business. All you have to do is rate, subscribe, send an email to info@calibrate.re. Obviously, if you follow Tyler's Instagram, just make sure you say, hey, I picked it up on Calibrate Real Estate, which is Calibrate_RE, and I'll buy a book for you and mail it to you. It's something I love to do for authors. So if you're out there, you got to share it. You got to tell us that you did that, but support authors. They put the books together because they've become an authority on the subject. So Tyler, thank you for being on our show. For our podcast producer, Kayla Davis, who set up this interview, I'm so appreciative of you, of course, Kayla. And as I love to say, for Tyler Cobble, this is Kyle Malnati on the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast, and we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody.